So let's do this again. So we have these four bodies. And we have the human being with the nerve sense system, the rhythmic system, and the metabolic limb system. And our whole embryological period from conception to birth, so that's about 9 months. Now this very important stream of nutrition has been building up the human body. Now at birth we can have this more. So I'm going to put this in. Put this in yellow. There's some yellow. So we have now the ego, which has been working, you might say the higher ego with especially the third hierarchy, the angels, archangels, and archetypes. They're working to build up the human body in the mother. And we've looked at how even this process recapitulates the creation of the world and all of the different kingdoms. And now that you might say that the tool of the human body is there for the soul spiritual human being. Steiner always called this the life bodily. And this the soul spiritual. And that this is always coming from the spiritual world. This has been built up on earth. And the whole of our incarnation is how these two work together. And how important education is that this union is harmonious, so that the life can live a real destiny. So that from the birth to 21, we've all helped this come together properly. So at birth now we have these, from the soul spiritual, the ego is working directly into the nerve sense system. The child, to a certain extent, has had certain nerve sense experiences. The senses, are, especially the vision and hearing and taste, the middle senses have been developed, but it's still very, very protected in the mother's womb. And then there's now many forms of birth. Some people are trying to keep this protection by having the child born in water. People that are still doing that, aren't they? And the other extreme is some women, they don't want to go through any pain. They get put out and they have a cesarean section and the child is pulled out of the mother. But with a natural birth, the child and the mother in a way work together. It's very painful for the mother. The child wants to come out, and they go through this whole process together with a doctor or a midwife. You have midwives in China? However the birth is performed, there will come that moment where the child cries and takes the first breath. So that is a real ego force coming into the child at that moment. The head is still open here. And with that breath, with that first breath, the ego is also coming with the astral body into the lungs. And then also the heart is already beating, but then you have to realize at that moment also the heart has to find the right relationship with the pulse. The lungs have to find the right relationship with the heart pulse. So, and these are the two things which Rudolf Steiner speaks about, especially in the education course, the study of man. Immediately now you have this rhythm, because this is unconscious and this is mostly happening at night, and this is conscious and this is happening in the day. And here you have the breath and here you have the pulse. So you have this rhythm of sleeping and waking, and this rhythm of breathing and pulse. And these are not yet coordinated. They're just starting, and they have to find their right relationship. And a lot of that is coming about in the first 3 years, but Steiner says all the way to the first, to 14, the education needs to be working, refining these two rhythms, night and day, and in-breath and out-breath. So, after the 9-month period, then there's the birth. Smaller and smaller. Okay, so let's first look at this 3-year period. Yeah? So here we have, the 7th. Here we have 3, and here we have 5. I'll put it down here. All right, so what's happening here in the first 3 years? In this period, you might say it's the birth of the life. It's the development of the life process. Yeah, and here we have breathing and warming, nurturing. These are more coming through here. Yeah. These are, well, the breathing is coming through here, the warming is coming from outside, the nurturing is coming from outside. These are more coming into the organ systems from outside. And then underneath that we have maintaining, growing, and generating. And these are done at night.
It's not regenerating, but generating.
Generating. These are generated, eventually leads to sexual reproduction, but you have to be able to build your own body before you can build another body. So already here, the generating forces are working to make the human form. The growth forces produce the substance to make the human form, but the growth has to stop, or it has to have the human form, this growth force. And we always have this sevenfold process. We'll have this again with the soul forces, and again with the spiritual forces. So in this whole period of 1 to 7, with bringing about the full development of the life processes, we have the secreting both working here and working here, holding the balance. Yeah, so here we have these forces coming in from outside, these forces are working, and we have both in the secreting is working between the two all the time. The out-breath is a secretion. We're secreting out the carbon dioxide. The carbon in our body is taken out. The skin has a lot to do with the warming process, cooling and warming. And there's secretions coming out of the skin all the time. And starting with the saliva in the mouth and then all the other secretions, the nutrient process is helped by these secretions from the body. Now these are more known as enzymes. And these, again, we have secretions inside the body that are helping maintaining, helping growing, helping generating. These are called hormones. So this whole period is about bringing about healthy life processes. So you might say that you have the head or the thinking processes working, the thinking processes, memory, thinking, cognition, working with the life processes first here. Yeah? So we'll have thinking. How do I lose my red?
Red.
So I put it over there. Ah, my red. Sorry. All right, and then we have a period here where you could say the feeling at the level of the life processes is developed. Yeah, and here the will is developed. Yeah, on the life process level. And the force of growth is coming from the head. So the head is already more developed, and slowly it's moving into this region, and then right into the legs in this region. So you're having what they call cerebral caudal development. So from the head down, yeah? So have the pulse working here too. Yeah. Okay. So this is a very important period of time from birth to 3 years old. So to be able to be a thinking being and to say I. So here we need another color. So this is prettier if I use colors, isn't it? It's just all white. So the whole purpose of this is in the life process is to be able to experience the I. Now the I is always working. And we'll see that how the I is working from 7 to 14 and then from 14 to 21 until the I is really born. And remember here, we've already developed the physical body. It's been born. The physical body is ready to go. So here, by this period, we're working on the birth of the life body. Life process. Yeah. All right, so 3 very important events happen here in the child's biography. The first one is all that we've talked about, all the movements that have to come about so that the child can walk upright. Yeah? And at the same time, you're beginning to have the child learn to speak. And eventually the child will say, I, and the child has now real memory. Thinking now takes place in memory pictures. Pictures that you might say the child lived in like a sea of pictures. Now the child begins to make its own pictures, its series of pictures, not yet with concepts, not yet logically, but one picture after another in memory. Of course, the child has memories before the child controls its memory, but those memories are called localized memories. Yeah? So the child, for instance, a 2-year-old child, when she's at grandma's house, she remembers everything. She remembers grandma, she remembers everything in the house. But if she's back home and you say, do you remember that at grandma's house? She doesn't have that memory yet. She can't grab a hold of that memory. It's there when she goes somewhere, but it's not under her control yet. Just like all the steps from beginning the original movement to crawling to just starting to walk. You can watch this coming about, this ability to stand upright and walk. You can also see this happening with memory. The child loves to look at a book, and again you say, where's the duck? Where's the horsey? Oh, there, oh, there. So these come back, and the child is preparing this, working with memory, until eventually, with their life processes, they can control it. They can bring up a memory. And between these two, the actual movement of the body, and the beginning movement of the mind, you have the speaking, which brings together the movement of the body and the movement of the mind. So the speaking is making that transition. Yeah? And the principle here, as we said, coming down from the head, is when one capability is really formed, now these forces, especially these forces here, are freed to do the next thing. So if the child is pushed too soon to have memory and speech in this period, it inhibits the growth processes. So although we hear about children who can read already at 2 years old, and that's the ideal of every parent if their child could read at 2 years old, that's really inhibiting growth process. And another thing you see happening here is the child gets its milk teeth, all of its milk teeth in. And again, like you say here, where they begin to have their permanent teeth, the creating of this very hard substance, because teeth is the hardest substance in your body, harder than your bone. The life forces that are needed to make this substance, and once it's begin to be there, you can see now these forces are free to do the next task. So you can see that this force, these life forces that are able to form the first teeth, when those are freed, now you can form solid memories. You can hold your memories together the way with those forces you've been building your teeth with. So now what was scattered memory, here it begins to be a whole thing. You have a beginning memory system. And Steiner actually explains your first memory happens when you're forming, the etheric body is forming the brain. The head was still a bit open. Now the head is closing completely, so it's completely within the skull. And he says the etheric body then is fully formed here, and it becomes like a mirror. And for the first time, the child sees its own images. And the most important activity of the child here is doing all of this through imitation. So this whole, especially remember this sheath of the family, is very, very important because the child is not really here yet. It's coming from the family into its body, yes? It's imitating everything that's happening around it in the parents, in the quality of the home. It's imitating this. Remember I spoke about, now they've discovered, as Steiner said, there are sense organs in the child for speech, thought, and the eye of the other, what's coming to them spiritually from the other. The child and all of us have sense organs. And now they've discovered, yes, in the brain there are these mirror neurons that completely mirror as if the child would speak, even though it doesn't, when the mother is speaking. And these are still working in us today, but they're completely, because the whole brain is being formed now. So you could say the child is living outside because it's imitating, really inwardly imitating its life processes are building its body according to what it's perceiving happening outside of it. Yeah? So when the mother is even looking at the child there in the cot, the child is staring up, the child is building himself with the perception of the warmth and the love flowing from the mother. So I say this is the thinking being developed in the life processes. That's because the whole process to be able for the child to meet all the impressions through the senses with their own inner activity as an I and create their memories, this is all happening in this period of time. So about 2.5 to 3, this process comes to a kind of completion when the child can say, I, can really experience in their consciousness, I am here and the world is out there. Yeah, I remember my first memory. How many of you have a memory of your first memory? I remember very distinctly, my mother is pushing me in some kind of chair or pram. She's with a friend. They're walking along outside in nature and they see a snake. And I can't see the snake, but I know the snake. I know what the snake is. From them, I know what a snake, and I know, oh, that snake is out there in the world. I'm going to have to meet him. Okay, now I say this other period is beginning between 3 and 5, and this is where feeling is being taken a hold by the life process. So what happens? What does the child begin to do then? Here it's imitating everything. What happens when you bring feeling into the thinking life process? Later we'll see the feeling in the soul processes and then feeling in the spiritual processes. But what happens when you bring feeling into the thinking life process? The child begins to make up their own worlds. Here, of course, the child is playing. It's playing with things and it's doing things. But here it really begins to play because it brings fantasy into its thinking. And it imagines things. Even so strong it can have imaginary friends all around it. What? Yeah, but they're, okay. But when they get there,
Between 3 and 5.
yeah, this is, yeah, it depends, somewhere. It's not a matter of saying it's 3 or 5, it's watching the child. When a child can really play on its own and it begins to need to play with other children, and they can really play together and play alone. The child can play alone and make up its stories of its village and its home and whatever it's doing. It can make up a fantasy world.
Play alone or play together.
Play alone or play with other children. But not follow. This is very important because otherwise, if he goes to kindergarten too soon, they just follow the teacher around all the time. And again, we're working, it's very important that the kindergarten realizes we're not here to teach. We're here helping the child get control of their life process. So here, the play within the kindergarten is to do lots of different activities, to bring regularity, to bring harmony into this bodily activity. Of course, you tell stories in kindergarten, but they're not to teach. Those stories will begin to be used to teach when they go to school, but they're to bring about the kind of activity to bring about a harmony in the growth processes in the child. Yeah? And here, the play continues until you can see, yes, the change of teeth is one thing, but also the child really now wants to learn. And the doctor and the teacher can see that the child now is in control of all their life processes. They have the coordination they need in the body. They're able to take care of themselves. They can know how to warm themselves when they get cold. They know the food they want. They can eat the food on their own. And they have a certain level of maturity in their body. They've done this work, and these forces that have made the body is now ready to work with the soul development. Okay, I'm going to erase this now because, yeah, you can take pictures. Because I want to get to a certain, so we can say by this time here, now, the life body has been born. The physical body and the life body have been born. The child is ready to go to school. Now we have 7 here. Okay. Now we've got to the school teacher. All right, and again, we're going to look at the child waking up and thinking, feeling, and will now it's no longer the life processes, it's the soul processes. I'm going to put soul functions in the process. Actually, soul forces. And what are the soul forces? Steiner gives a wonderful picture of these in Theosophy. Desire, sensation, and wish. You might say the lower ones. And then the higher ones he calls soul light, soul force, soul force, yeah, and soul life. Now, in between we have liking, we have not liking, and liking. Now they're the other way around. These are more of the bodily forces, and these are more the soul spiritual forces. And here we have, between these two, we have liking and not liking. So you know Steiner speaks of these two forces in the soul, sympathy and antipathy. Sympathy and antipathy. So here you have both forces working. The antipathy is stronger here, but it has sympathy in it. And here you have a balance between them, and here you have the sympathy is stronger, but it still has antipathy in it. I'm going to talk more about this, but I want to get to a certain place for Ellen so she can work with a case study this afternoon. We can look at this in much more detail, yes? Wishing. Okay, now the child is in school. Now the story is learning. Now the child can really learn, not just play, but actually memorize things, learn things, and practice things. Of course, you can introduce a child to play an instrument before they go to school. Even in kindergarten, they can play around with music. But you will use too many forces if you try to make them practice the music. Whereas here, they are ready to practice. They need to practice. They need to begin to develop their capacities in learning. And they're desiring learning like food. Yeah? And this is a wonderful period of childhood. It's a good thing that Waldorf teachers start with the children in the first class and get to, yeah? Because you don't yet have this crisis, which we call the Rubicon. I forgot to mention, you have these three important crises that the child has and with the parents in the different periods, the three different periods. So what's the crisis in the first 7 years? It happens in the middle when the child begins to say I. What does the child begin to do? Defiance. Yeah? No. Yeah? Especially if you've been saying all the time too much no, eventually the child will say no. Yeah? I always had great respect watching Hélène with our 5 children, because my tendency would be saying, no, you better stop that, the little one. But she would never say no, she would always show them something else to do. Get their will to move into something else rather than confront them. Because remember, the child at that age is imitating you. When it starts, its way of defiance will be the defiance it's picked up from you and your husband, yeah? Or your wife. So this is a very wonderful period, especially we tell lots of stories to the children, but these stories are now instructional stories, starting with the fairy tales, and the legends, and the fables. And why do we say this is thinking now in the soul forces? Because through these concepts in the stories, the child is differentiating their own soul. So we talk about the hero, or you talk about the maiden, or you talk about the witch, or you talk about the sorcerer. The child is feeling these different parts of their soul. And it's important that these stories are a whole, with all these different characters, and that the story itself has a moral. It's teaching the children something about the soul world, and how it works, and how it finds its balance. And tomorrow I've got an outline of the Waldorf curriculum. We'll start to look at what kind of main lessons, especially the Waldorf school, has at these different times. But what I want to get to is this period starts to end when the child starts to move into now feeling their own selves. Before, they've lived outside in the parents, and then in the teacher. And in this period, the Rubicon comes because the whole soul world now is beginning to internalize, and they begin to feel themselves. And the child, it's a really difficult time for the child. The child was before like in paradise, and now they're being thrown out of paradise. And they begin to be critical about the world and about themselves. And maybe they even think, you're not my real parents, about their parents. Or they begin to think about death for the first time. They think, grandma died, and maybe mama will die, and I could die. I'm going to stop there because Hélène's going to do a case history involving this Rubicon. We'll continue tomorrow because this is such an important time. Steiner says the way the child is treated and met at this age has untold significance for their health, both soul and physical, in the future. And if you have questions about these processes, I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow. Okay? So I'll just leave you with this. The astral body is taking real form. Okay?